Part 2 of this session is the Kentucky Public Service Commission Roundtable. Our moderator will be Lindsey Flora, Deputy Executive Director of the Public Service Commission, and our panelists include Public Service Commission Chairman Michael J. Schmitt, Vice Chairman Kent A. Chandler, and Commissioner Talina R. Mathews. I will now turn the screen over to your moderator.
Hello.
Lindsey, we can hear you and we can see your screen, but we cannot see your camera if you have it turned on.
I've got it turned on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and now we can see your screen.
Okay, and you can hear me, right? Okay. All right. Well, good morning, and welcome to the Public Service Commission's Roundtables discussion. As you just heard, our panel consists of 3 commissioners: Chairman Schmitt, Vice Chairman Chandler, and Commissioner Mathews. Following their presentations, we should have some time to answer a few questions, only with the condition that the commission can't speak on current cases or anything that's anticipated in the proceeding. Any opinions and statements made in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Public Service Commission. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Public Service Commission. The commissioners are appointed by the governor and serve in staggered 4-year terms. The commission regulates around 1,100 utilities across the state, but not under our jurisdiction are TVA electric cooperatives and municipalities, except for gas pipeline safety. You should be able to see our mission statement at the bottom of the slide. Functions we perform to support our mission include establishing rates, performing inspections, we do management audits, ensure meter accuracy, consumer complaints, we investigate accidents, and among many other duties. We currently have a wonderful staff of about 74 in 4 divisions. Last month, the Public Service Commission conducted 5 hearings. We issued over 106 orders, opened 36 new cases that were filed, and closed 28 cases. I'd like to give you a little background on our commissioners. They are one of the most qualified bunch of people you've ever been around. Our chairman is Michael J. Schmitt. He was appointed and designated as chairman of the Public Service Commission in June of 2016. He was reappointed June of 2019, but prior to joining the PSC, Chairman Schmitt was a partner in the law firm Porter, Schmitt, Banks & Baldwin in Paintsville. He's a member of the Kentucky Bar Association. He's admitted to practice before all federal courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States. He has served as a special justice on the Kentucky Supreme Court. Chairman Schmitt received his Juris Doctorate with distinction from the University of Kentucky College of Law. He's a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and has been recognized for his legal expertise numerous times. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Kentucky. Our Vice Chair is Kent A. Chandler. He was appointed to the Public Service Commission in July of 2020 this year as the Vice Chair. Prior to his appointment, he served as the Executive Director of the Public Service Commission in February of this year up until his appointment as Vice Chair. He currently is serving as the Acting Executive Director. Prior to becoming the Executive Director, Kent worked as an advisor to the commissioners before coming to the PSC from the Attorney General's office. At the Attorney General's office, he was in the rate intervention, and during his 4 years there, he appeared before state, federal, local boards and courts, and regularly represented consumers before the PSC in utility cases. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Finance from Murray State University and received his Juris Doctorate from the Northern Kentucky University Salmon P. Chase College of Law. And our other commissioner is Dr. Talina Mathews. She has served on the commission since July of 2017. Like Vice Chairman Chandler, she also served as Executive Director of the Public Service Commission before appointment to the commission. During her 20 years in state government, She has served as a policy advisor, a staff economist at the PSC, and the Energy and Environment Cabinet, and she also served as executive director of the Energy Office. She holds several leadership roles in regional and national organizations. She holds a PhD in economics from UK and received her bachelor's degree in mathematics from Berea College. At this time, if I could please get the commissioners to share their mics and cameras, we'll go on with our next presentation.
On. Okay. Thank you, Lindsey. For the last several years, the Public Service Commission has been involved in an endeavor to basically increase the reliability and the effectiveness of Kentucky's rural water districts. I think last year or year before, the American Society of Professional Engineers issued a study and report, which insofar as Kentucky was concerned, indicated that over the next 20 years, we would need approximately $8 billion in order to get our water infrastructure, water delivery system up to date. I think that, in my own view, is probably a conservative estimate based upon some of the actual cases that we have seen in our attempts to address the problem. The Kentucky Public Service Commission, if we could look at the next slide, the jurisdictional water utilities that we regulate control approximately 62% of the water pipelines in this state. The others are owned by, one, the city of Louisville, and basically municipal water districts. If we look at the next slide, number 6, or page 6, you will see where our rural water districts are located. Those in blue are the Kentucky rural water districts, and the water associations are in green. And if you look, those are usually in counties outside of a municipal system, and so they tend to have longer transmission lines, fewer customers per mile, and as a result, their operating expenses are larger in proportion to the revenues that they actually collect. Investor-owned utilities in Kentucky, there are, I think, 4, and they are regulated by the Public Service Commission, and they're shown in yellow, and you can see those are essentially Kentucky American Water Company, for the most part, in central Kentucky. And then in the gray areas are areas served by municipal water systems, or those operated by towns and cities in Kentucky, and those are not regulated by the Kentucky Public Service Commission. Beginning in about 2016, when Commissioner Mathews and former Vice Chairman Bob Cicero and I came to the Public Service Commission, it was obvious in looking at rate cases filed by the water districts and at their annual reports that water loss was a substantial problem for many of these utilities. And one would say, why would you be concerned with water loss? Well, the problem with water loss, we originally thought, was just one where there were perhaps leaks that weren't being fixed. And we calculated, or had staff calculate, the loss to these water districts each time they came in for a rate case, how much money they were actually losing by reason of lost water or non-revenue water. And we would send these letters to the water district, to the general manager, to the chairman, and we started sending them to the local county judge executives and fiscal courts. But we didn't seem to get much of a positive or feedback from that, or any indication that there was a concern. And so In March of 2019, the commission initiated an investigation into 11 jurisdictional utilities which had a water loss as reported on their annual reports and as calculated by our inspectors at above 35%. We also, during the same time, were already had investigations and cases underway on 2 additional districts, and one was Martin County and the other Cannonsburg. And so we had essentially 13 water districts out of the 138 or 139 that exist in Kentucky, for which we actually took testimony over a period of several weeks. And that testimony ultimately culminated in a very voluminous order and in a comprehensive report on the status of Kentucky rural water districts in Kentucky. So when the water districts that we looked at, I indicated to you, had a water loss above 35%. Some were as high as 65, maybe 170%. And you can see from the map here where those water districts are located. And most of those were in eastern Kentucky, a couple one in northern Kentucky, one in central Kentucky, and one in far western Kentucky. There were a number of other districts since our investigation that obviously we have found need substantial help in terms of management, development of infrastructure, replacement programs, and in getting the necessary rate increases and financing up to speed to where these projects can actually be undertaken and completed. But to put it in perspective, our problem in Kentucky is not just with rural water districts. The next slide will show you information that we received from other sources, which indicated the water loss sustained by municipal water companies, which the Public Service Commission does not regulate. If you can look at that, some of these, the highest is Tompkinsville at 76%, going down to Burkesville at 62%. Now, that water loss is basically results in a loss of a lot of revenue. What is water loss? Water loss, or non-revenue water, in essence, is defined as the water that a water district produces, treats, purchases from others, minus what is used in operating the system, used by fire protection agencies, fire departments. The rest of it is water which obviously cannot be accounted for, which has been bought or processed, cost money to buy or process, but for which no revenue is received. And in some of these cases, for instance, Martin County Water District at present still has a water loss in excess of 70% as of May or June of this year. There are many others on our list that were part of our system, such as Rattlesnake Ridge, which had a water loss, I think, in a high water loss of over 40%, 45%, and has high rates as a result. During the course of our investigation and prior thereto, our former Deputy Executive Director and Director of Divisions of Inspection, John Lyons, who is hosting this program, developed through his staff a risk ranking for water systems. And if you can see on the screen, the risk ranking of, and this is as of 2020, and the list has not changed much since 2019, other than Martin County has dropped from number 1 to number 2. But you can see of the 16 water districts shown, 9 of those were in the 13 that we basically used as part of our investigation. The next slide will demonstrate the unemployment rate as it presently exists in Kentucky. And if you look at the blue shows the highest unemployment rate, which as of July of this year was basically between 7.9% and 15.3%. Last year, during our investigation, although the unemployment figures for each county differed, the fact that the highest unemployment rates were in northeast and southeast Kentucky basically remained the same. So one would logically, or could logically conclude that the fact that there are higher rates of unemployment, and probably have been for a number of years, and these counties also represent, to a large extent, some of the highest poverty rates in our state, that might be a reason for the fact that most of the water districts which were failing based upon our examination and investigation were in eastern Kentucky. But in my opinion, that is in fact not the case. These water districts, I think, as we can discuss in a moment, are failing not because the people could not afford to pay the water rates, but basically the fact that the management was totally ineffective. In many instances, the districts were mismanaged, and political influence from local political actors designed to keep rates artificially low, in essence, caused the systems to, over a period of 20, 25, 30 years, to deteriorate to the point where essentially Martin County, in fact, in my view, did collapse, and several others perhaps are on the verge of it. The next slide will show customer rates highest among all water utilities. And you can see there the highest rate is a district in western Kentucky, North Hopkins, followed by Caldwell County, but you will see Rattlesnake Ridge is in northeast Kentucky, headquarters, I think, in Carter County, and its rates are $62.52 per 4,000 gallons of water. And this district has a high water loss, where the water loss would mean the loss of revenue of $150,000, $200,000 per year. You can see Southern Water District, which is in the southern part of Floyd County, also has high rates. You will see Southern has two rates, one at $49.46 and the other at $50.05. And the reason that they have a $49.46 rate, which at their request we actually reduced by $5 early this year or late last year, is a flat rate. This water district had not done anything to replace its meters and was not testing meters, and it was discovered that they had 750 or more water meters which were reading zero. The rest of their water meters were reading slow, which meant they weren't accurately measuring all the water that was used, and hundreds of people apparently had no meters at all, which was a result of apparently political or social decisions, which meant that the rest of the ratepayers were paying while hundreds of other people were either paying a flat rate or paying no rate at all. In the end, our investigation, after weeks of testimony and evaluation, uncovered some common characteristics of all of these water districts which have had difficulty. One of them was that many went years and years without coming before the Public Service Commission for a rate increase. For instance, there must be 10 or 15 at least water districts in the state of Kentucky which have not been in for a rate increase since 1985. And one would wonder how these districts could keep operating if they weren't getting periodic rate increases. What we found was essentially this. These all water districts, most all the water districts we investigated, were using portions of the rates which they had been granted and should be used for infrastructure repair and replacement, or in fact being used for operational expenses, management salaries, so that many of these districts would go 8 or 10 years or more without a rate increase, and during this whole time period would allow their infrastructure to completely deteriorate. Most of these water districts were established in the 1960s, 1970s, and their distribution lines and the transmission mains would have a useful life of 50, 60 to 75 years. In Eastern Kentucky, those useful lives may well be shorter because of the terrain, which results in very high and excessive water pressure for much of these systems. So, but over time, these water districts would borrow money from the federal government or get grants from the Rural Development Association or group. And under KRS 278.023, the Kentucky Public Service Commission has been prohibited from basically interfering with those loans. As a result, we saw many districts, including, but in addition, others than the ones we investigated, were borrowing money for projects that were not particularly needed or were not high priority. They were borrowing money and increasing rates a little bit so that they could repay the loan and have a little left over. And over this time, they were surviving while their water system, while their infrastructure was essentially rotting in the ground and falling apart. They, one water district, for instance, one we found in the ones we investigated, basically was surviving on rural development loans. And they were not including any money in their proposed rate increase, which we could do nothing about, but rural development had to approve, which basically they left off any funds for depreciation, no money for replacement of infrastructure. And essentially over time, several of these basically have just gone broke. We have a hearing later today with a district which was in fact one of the ones we investigated and was and is in essentially the same position. So we also found several districts had unauthorized loans. Most loans of any significance are required to be approved by the Public Service Commission. But many of these districts, a number of these districts, apparently borrowed money without authorization and then, unfortunately, could not pay it back. What was the cause of these problems? Essentially, a lack of proper education and training, for the most part, on behalf of water district general managers. There is no minimum requirement in terms of education or training that is required of a general manager. During the course of our testimony, in one of the cases, we heard from an expert witness who claimed that a manager of a water district, for instance, that had as few as 3,000 to 3,500 customers should have a college degree in either accounting or business administration or in engineering, and should command a salary of $70,000 to $95,000. Most people would say in these smaller districts, well, we can't afford that. My personal opinion is they can't afford not to do it. A competent general manager can save these small districts a great deal of money, as evidenced by the fact that in Floyd County, where Southern Water District was a failing district, but hired a professional management company. That district is now being turned around. And in Martin County, which the Public Service Commission ordered to hire a professional management company, that district has also seen marked improvement, and one would expect to see over time a lowering in rates rather than raising rates, even though people at present complain that they shouldn't be paying professional management the salary that they're now commanding. These districts, for lack of competent management, basically have had no capital improvement plans, so that in effect they have no plan to replace infrastructure. It's when it breaks we try to fix it, and ultimately over time there are too many breaks that can't be fixed, and rather than replacing miles of pipe at a time, you patch one or two, and then over time the entire system ultimately collapses. So political influence it has been an issue. We have seen people tell us on the stand and also privately after testimony is over that, well, the county judge is running for re-election, and we're not. We were told not to raise rates, or we were always encouraged to keep rates low. Now, the old adage, a stitch in time saves nine, I think is absolutely applicable here. If these systems had been adequately, if there had been adequate planning, if infrastructure had been replaced according to a set schedule and rates gradually increased over the years, people in most of these counties would have high quality water at a less price than they're now paying for a substandard product. And there would be no need for the state of Kentucky to have to invest billions of dollars in fixing basically what was allowed to fall apart because of either misguided political influence or just an inability to understand the business management required to operate a modern water company in this day and time. So we found, for instance, in some of these districts, there was no management in terms of requiring where bids were less than $20,000. There was no record that more than one supplier had been contacted about selling the product at a certain price. Certain local businesses were favored. In one district, we found that we were told that the local business was allowing the district to borrow money, and they weren't concerned about exactly whether they got paid on time or not. And we found out that this district, with the water district, had permitted and agreed informally, nothing in writing, that this one local vendor could charge a high rate of interest, so that we were told it was 16% to 18%. Our analysts computed it was as high as 22%. So that on a $35,000 debt for a product's purchase, the interest rate was about $28,000. So actually it was, say, $53,000 debt, $28,000 of which was interest, which was being apparently compounded on perhaps a monthly basis. These districts, none of the districts, or very few of the districts, had adequate audits. Many had no audits at all. The ones that had no audits said they couldn't afford the audits. The auditors, when they were audited, the auditors unfortunately found in many instances there were no invoices. Audits did not generally comment upon failures, inappropriate management practices, or accounting practices. And as a result, simply the districts ran amok. The last slide we have, which is on the screen, represents the recommendations made by the Public Service Commission to the Kentucky General Assembly and the Joint Task Force on Water and Wastewater Infrastructure. So I will not go through all of those, but they all essentially represent basically getting proper management, proper accounting procedures required, and essentially, in the end, a merger and consolidation of many small districts which do not have a sufficient population to be able to afford to operate. And many of the districts do not have a sufficient customer base in order to be able to afford an engineer, which is necessary essentially to develop an infrastructure plan and to help with bidding and construction issues. One of the districts that we investigated had been encouraged 20 years before to work with other water districts to share an engineer in order to basically be able to help its infrastructure along in terms of what needed to be done and how best to achieve those goals. But the district basically decided it wanted to do it itself and did not want to work with any other district. While the General Assembly has not yet acted on any of our recommendations, we expect perhaps some to be enacted during the next session of the General Assembly. And in the meantime, the Public Service Commission on its own has been reviewing, to the extent we have the records, finances for many of our small water districts. And we have actually ordered 23 water districts since November of last year to come in for a rate increase and for a review of their finances. In addition to that, we have been authorizing surcharges to allow districts to charge so much money per meter, and that money is to go into a special account restricted to infrastructure projects which must be approved by the Public Service Commission. In the past, those surcharges were permitted by the PSC as part of a rate case when the district was required to submit a plan. We are going through a metamorphosis in that process. We changed it to basically begin allowing districts to request surcharges outside the context of a rate case and to be permitted to collect the surcharge subject to refund during a period of time when they will be permitted to obtain the services of an engineer or an engineering firm and basically put a plan together. And our last case, we are in the process of basically asking and ultimately requiring, if necessary, a water district to accept a surcharge in order to basically meet its infrastructure requirements. I'm sorry to have taken so long. It's a complicated project, a complicated problem that essentially can be solved by water district consolidation and essentially professional management, all of which I think must be required unless the taxpayers of this state are willing to accept periodically spending billions of dollars to replace infrastructure which could have been replaced as all along with the adequate rates that were given to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Schmitt. Our next issue is going to be dealing with Commissioner Mathews or Vice Chandler. Looks like Vice Chairman Chandler is going to come on. So if you'd like to talk about our COVID-19 response, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Good morning. So yeah, we just want to walk through a little bit about the response the commission has had to COVID-19 as it relates to not only its regulation of utilities, but internal processes. Can we go to the next slide? So in March, I think March 16th, we initiated an order that discussed what we were doing on an outward, on an outward basis to the utilities. But in it, we sort of at least alluded to some of the things that we would be doing internally, such as ceasing all in-person inspections, asking utilities not to send us paper filings or the paper copies of electronic filings, and that we'd be closing the PSC office building to the public for hearings, for meetings, whatever it may be, until further notice. Next slide. We also changed some of our internal processes, including the fact that we knew we had to move more things to electronic cases rather than dealing in paper cases. I actually checked yesterday, since March the 16th, we've only had 2 cases that were initiated that were paper. Historically, something around 35 or 40% of our cases were paper cases and not electronic. So since March, we've had 2 cases that were initiated with paper. One was an 811 violation that the commission initiated in a paper filing, and the other was a pro se consumer complaint. So we're proud of that, and it's certainly something that we're going to look at moving forward. We've conducted a number of hearings, maybe 6 or 7 hearings virtually, and live streamed those over YouTube. In lieu of folks trying to send us paper, non-case paper, filings with us, we implemented a simple PSC executive director inbox so that people can send electronic versions of non-case files, and then we can take those and process them. We've certainly increased our capacity to have meetings virtual internally. Next slide. So we've got to figure out, what do we keep and what do we fix and what do we go back to once this is all over. There are a number of things that we will keep or try to modify. The first is when I came to the commission, I was very surprised by the amount of paper that we receive on a daily basis. One thing that we're going to be looking at doing is modifying that email inbox for non-case filings, and attempting to create a web portal where people and utilities can upload documents to us in lieu of mailing those to us. It will reduce our personnel requirements and streamline things, certainly. We've also talked internally about whether or not we need to look at changing the regulations. We're already doing a cover-to-cover regulation review internally, and we've already filed a few of them for public comment. One of the things that we've talked about is instead of, whether or not we should allow utilities to make non-electronic filings, or whether we should require for all non-pro se cases that they should be required to be electronically filed. And I'll just say our confidential information filing process is antiquated, to say the least. And so we'll be looking at new ways to do that moving forward. And whether or not we're going to continue with virtual hearings after COVID. It certainly reduces travel and rate case expense for utilities, which reduces costs for customers, and it can be useful in certain circumstances. I'll say that it probably may be a little less effective when you don't have somebody 5 feet away requiring a witness to answer a question than it is when they're 1,000 miles away participating remotely. Next slide. So just real quick, we initiated a docket 2020-85 on March the 16th. Part of that docket in our initial order, we suspended disconnections for non-payment and the assessment of late fees for our jurisdictional utilities. Governor Beshear issued an executive order a couple months later doing the same for everyone who provides water, gas, electric, and sewer service that is not a PSC regulated entity. We also granted a number of deviations in that order, including non-safety related inspections, office hours. There are a number of regulations that we have that require certain items for office hours and utility operations. And like I said earlier about paper filings. Next slide. We also did a data request in that. I believe it was in June, asking utilities what the impact of COVID-19 has been on them at that point, and also on their customers. We asked about arrearages, we asked about the number of folks that would be subject to disconnection, but for the commission's orders, and also asked about how utilities are assessing and actually completing bad debt write-offs. So following that data request response, we noticed that the biggest takeaway we had was that the number of customers who pay on time for the residential class was either consistent or increasing through the pandemic up to June. The biggest changes were for commercial and industrial customers. We had probably half of the respondents, the number of customers who pay on time each month for the residential class was increasing. I think there was only one utility that, as a trend, was significantly decreasing the residential on-time pay percentage. That was not the case for non-residential customers. Commercial and industrial customers, some utilities were unchanged, but for some utilities, there was a significant reduction in the number of customers paying on time. We did notice, though, that the amount of arrearage per customer for residential class was creeping upward, and we took that into account in a subsequent order. Next slide. So September the 21st, the commission entered an additional order following up on their March 16th order in 2020-85, lifting the moratorium on disconnections effective October the 20th. But for residential customers, the commission is requiring mandatory minimum repayment plans of 6 months, and they're on a fixed equal installment over the life of the plan. The minimum is 6 months. All customers have to be provided these for the amount of arrearage that they accumulated between March and October. But the utility can actually offer a longer term payment plan up to 2 years. And we've also required that utilities continue to not assess late payment fees through the end of this year, although we do ask that they track that amount. Next slide. We did note in the order that the commission conservatively estimates that there is an unmet need for water and sewer assistance as of September that exceeds $15 million, and that there is approximately $75 million unmet need for gas, electric, water, and sewer assistance for residential customers in Kentucky. By the end of the year, that amount is likely to exceed $150 million. That $75 million that we estimated, the amazing part about that, it's a huge number. It's a huge number at the same time that there was a fairly unprecedented LIHEAP cooling program this summer. That still meant that there were millions of dollars of arrearages for residential customers for gas and electric service. And so I just want to put that into, there were tens of millions of dollars available for LIHEAP this summer that ordinarily are only available in winter. So it's still a significant need out there that's not being met. Is there one more slide? Yeah. So lastly, I just want to say, as part of the order, the commission put out a call to action to both the governor's office as well as the Kentucky's federal delegation, noting this unmet need and requesting additional assistance, whether through LIHEAP or some other funding source, but specifically noting that although there is LIHEAP available for electric for cooling and electric and gas and other fuels for winter heating, there is no federal program for water and sewer assistance, although certainly those are required necessities anytime, but even more so during a global viral pandemic. So we've not gotten any response on that yet, but we're looking forward to what comes out of the governor's office as well as the federal delegation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Now I believe we have Commissioner Mathews, I believe, and we're going to talk a little bit about renewable energy, specifically utility scale solar. Commissioner Mathews, there you are. Thank you. Sorry, we can't hear you, Commissioner.
I said, I believe our time ran out at 11:45. Is that correct? Would someone from the organizers confirm that, please?
Yes, Commissioner Mathews, yes.
Okay. Well, I will just give you my apologies. If anybody has any questions for me, type them into the chat function and we will get back.
But so
I will
Commissioner,
not-
Commissioner Mathews, you can have a couple of minutes. I'll give you a couple of minutes if you have anything burning you'd like to say.
Okay, just quickly, we approved 3 solar contracts entered into by Big Rivers in September. We are initiating a review process for the interconnection and net metering guidelines. Motions to intervene in that docket must be filed by October 30th. We have an RFP for a net metering consultant, which closes tomorrow. Kentucky Power has a rate case in, and that will be the first opportunity for us to look at the net metering compensation, because remembering in that law change, it not only changed from 30 kW to 45, but it also gave the PSC the responsibility to determine those compensation rates. Yesterday, we initiated an investigation into energy cooperatives' adherence to their net metering tariff. That should be on our website today. You mentioned Order 2222 at FERC. Yes, that would allow aggregators to bid in small distributed energy resources and batteries into the wholesale market. They can do that now. They just go through the utility. We're looking at those issues to make sure that the utility doesn't procure capacity that customers don't use. So we're a little concerned about the jurisdictional impacts of allowing the wholesale market providers such as PJM to dig down into our distribution system. And you have talked about all of the electric generation and transmission siting board cases. So I think we are good to go. And I'm not going to take any more of Kate Shank's time.
Thank you, Commissioner Mathews.